They thought I was just a forgetful old woman, easy to discard. My son, Michael, and his wife, Janice, sold the house Arthur and I built, the one filled with 60 years of our laughter and tears, right out from under me. They said it was for my own good, a phrase that still tastes like ash in my mouth. What they didn't know, what they never bothered to discover in their rush to cash in on my life, was that Arthur, bless his meticulous, loving soul, had left one last gift hidden within the very fabric of that original deed, a safeguard against the kind of callousness that was now threatening to swallow me whole. This is the story of how I took back not just my home, but my life, and how they learned that this old woman wasn't quite finished yet. Please settle in. Maybe grab a cup of tea, because this is a story I need to tell, and perhaps you'll let me know in the comments what you think of it all. The house on Elm Street wasn't just wood and plaster to me. It was a living album of my life. Arthur and I bought the plot when it was nothing but a field of daisies, long before Michael was even a dream. We'd saved, scrimped, and poured our youth into its foundations. I remembered Arthur, his face smudged with dirt but beaming, handing me the ceremonial first hammer to drive a nail, crookedly, into the frame of what would become our kitchen. Every rose bush in the garden I planted. The swing on the old oak tree out back, Arthur built that for Michael, and later, I pushed Michael's own children on it, their giggles echoing the ones from a generation before. The worn patch on the armrest of a living room armchair? That was Arthur's spot, where he'd read the paper every evening. After he passed, 10 years ago now, the house became my solace, a warm embrace of memories. It was where I still felt him, in the creak of the floorboards, in the scent of old books and lemon polish. I'd lived a life of sacrifice, not that I ever called it that. Raising Michael, supporting Arthur through his business ventures, always putting their needs before my own. It was just what you did, what love meant. I never expected a medal, just a measure of the same devotion in return, especially in my twilight years. I suppose that was my first miscalculation. The whispers started subtly. Janice, mostly. Mother Clara, this big house must be such a burden for you. Or, don't you get lonely here all by yourself? Michael would chime in more awkwardly. We worry about you, Mom. What if you fall? I'd wave them off, assuring them I was perfectly fine, that Mrs. Peterson from next door checked in, that my garden kept me busy and my mind sharp. But the suggestions became more frequent, more insistent. They spoke of lovely retirement communities, places with no upkeep and people your own age. I knew what they meant. They saw the house not as my home, but as an asset, a hefty sum tied up in bricks and mortar that could be, in their eyes, better utilized. Their visits, once a source of joy, began to feel like inspections, their eyes cataloging the perceived work, the potential profit. I started to feel like a fixture in the house that was also becoming an inconvenience. The warmth I'd always felt within those walls began to carry a chill of apprehension. My sacrifices, it seemed, had a statute of limitations in their minds, and the clock was ticking. I was just an old woman, frail and perhaps a little muddled in their eyes, standing between them and what they felt they were owed. How wrong they were about the muddled part, but how terrifyingly close they came to being right about the rest. The day the world tilted on its axis began like any other. I was tending to Arthur's prize-winning peace roses, their creamy petals unfurling in the morning sun. A sleek, unfamiliar car pulled up to the curb, and a man in a sharp suit emerged, clipboard in hand. He smiled a professional, impersonal smile and asked if this was the Miller residence. I confirmed it was. Wonderful, he said. Just doing a final walkthrough for the new owners. They'll be taking possession on the 1st of next month. The pruning shears slipped from my grasp, clattering onto the stone path. New owners? Walkthrough? My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. I think you have the wrong house, I managed, my voice a thin tremor. He frowned, consulted his clipboard. Clara Miller? Sold by Michael Miller, acting with power of attorney. Power of attorney. Yes, I'd signed something a few years back when I had that nasty bout of pneumonia. Michael had said it was just in case so he could pay my bills if I was incapacitated. He'd looked so earnest, so concerned. It never occurred to me it couldn't be used for this. The man, seeing the shock on my face, softened slightly. "Ma'am, are you all right? Perhaps you should sit down," but I couldn't move. The roses, the house, the very ground beneath my feet seemed to sway. My home, sold. Without a word to me. Without my consent. The casual cruelty of it was a physical blow. The man, whose name I think was Mr. Henderson, but it was all a blur, eventually left, looking rather uncomfortable, promising someone would be in touch. I stood there for a long time, the sun climbing higher, the scent of roses suddenly cloying. Then, I stumbled inside, the familiar comfort of my home now feeling alien, violated. I sank into Arthur's armchair, its worn velvet a poor substitute for the strength I needed. When Michael finally called, hours later, his voice was breezy, almost cheerful.
"Mom.
Just wanted to let you know everything's sorted with the house. The Penningtons are a lovely young couple. They're so excited, sorted." As if he'd just arranged for the gutters to be cleaned. The sheer audacity of it stole my breath. "Michael," I began, my voice shaking with a rage I rarely felt. "You sold my home? Arthur's home? Without telling me?" There was a slight pause. "Mom, we talked about this. It's too much for you. Janice and I found you a wonderful apartment, closer to us. It's all for the best. We hadn't talked about this." They had told me their opinions I had resisted, and they had evidently decided my input was irrelevant. "For the best," I choked out. "For whose best, Michael? Yours? Janice's? Did you even consider me, for one moment, as anything more than an obstacle?" His tone turned defensive, laced with that familiar impatience. "Mom, don't be dramatic. You're getting older. You need care, supervision. We did what we had to do. The power of attorney gave me the right." The words hung in the air, cold and legalistic. He had the right. He'd used my trust, my temporary vulnerability, as a weapon against me. The apartment he mentioned, I found out later, was a small, sterile unit in a block they'd probably gotten a deal on, far from my garden, my friends, my life. It was a waiting room for the inevitable, and they were eager to usher me into it. The betrayal was so profound. It was a physical ache deep in my chest, a cold dread that settled into my bones. That night, I didn't sleep. I wandered through the rooms of my house, touching the furniture, the photographs, the memories. Each one was a fresh stab of pain. They weren't just taking my house, they were erasing my past, and it felt my future. The days that followed were a blur of despair and disbelief. Janice came over, ostensibly to help me sort things, but it felt more like she was there to ensure I didn't cause any trouble, to manage my decline into quiet acquiescence. Her sympathy was shallow, her pronouncements about the benefits of the new apartment delivered with an unnerving brightness. "Think of it, Clara, no more stairs. And a nice little communal garden, if you feel up to it." My garden, the one Arthur and I had cultivated for decades, was over half an acre, a riot of color and life. A nice little communal garden felt like a cruel joke. Michael kept his distance, calling with forced cheerfulness, always too busy to visit, too busy to face the wreckage he'd created. They sent brochures for the apartment, glossy pictures of tiny rooms and smiling, anonymous elderly people. It looked like a prison, however prettily packaged. I felt utterly powerless, a leaf caught in a storm, buffeted by forces beyond my control. My friends, when I finally found the strength to tell them, were horrified. Old Mrs. Henderson from down the street, whose late husband had been Arthur's lawyer and closest friend, was particularly incensed. "Clara, that boy of yours has lost his mind. And his manners." Arthur would be spinning in his grave. Her words, meant to comfort, only deepened my sorrow. Arthur. He would have known what to do. He always knew. He had been my rock, my protector. And in my darkest hour, I felt his absence more keenly than ever. I spent hours in his old study, surrounded by his books, his papers, the lingering scent of pipe tobacco that even years of airing out couldn't fully erase. I'd run my fingers over the spines of his favorite novels, the meticulously organized files. It was there, amidst the grief and the encroaching sense of doom, that a flicker of something else began to stir. A memory, faint at first, like a half-forgotten dream. Arthur, sitting at his large oak desk, a sheaf of papers before him. It was shortly after we'd made the final mortgage payment on the house, a day of immense pride and celebration. He'd been unusually serious. "Clara," he'd said, his hand covering mine, "this house is our fortress, our legacy. I've made sure of it. I've added something to the original deed, a little something extra, just in case. Something to protect you. Always, I hadn't paid it much mind at the time, lost in the joy of being mortgage-free, trusting Arthur implicitly. What need would I have for extra protection?" He was there. But now, his words echoed in the silent room with an urgent clarity. Something to protect you. Always a wild, improbable hope began to beat against the despair. The original deed. Not the copies, not the abstracts, but the very first one, the one that chronicled our ownership from the day we bought the land. Where would it be? Arthur was a man of habit and precision. Important papers went in one place, the old metal strongbox he kept bolted to the floor in the back of his closet. My hands trembled as I knelt before the closet, the key, which I wore on a chain around my neck alongside my wedding band, suddenly feeling heavy with significance. It took some effort to move aside the winter coats and old shoe boxes, but there it was, dull gray metal, solid and unassuming. The key slid into the lock with a familiar click. Inside, nestled amongst old insurance policies, stock certificates, and our marriage license, was a thick, vellum envelope tied with a faded blue ribbon. On the front, in Arthur's neat, precise script, were the words, "Deed and Covenants, Elm Street Property, to be opened by Clara and Miller." My heart pounded as I carefully untied the ribbon and slid out the documents. There were several pages, yellowed with age, covered in dense legal script. The original deed was there, signed by us and the sellers so many decades ago. And attached to it, just as Arthur had said, was another document, titled Declaration of Marital Homestead and Protective Covenant. I wasn't a lawyer, and the language was dense, archaic in places. I scanned through it, my eyes searching for something, anything, that could give me a lifeline. Phrases leaped out. Inalienable right of spousal occupancy, protection against involuntary alienation, conditions precedent to any transfer, and then I found it. A clause so specific, so clearly worded, it made my breath catch in my throat. It stated, in unequivocal terms, that during my lifetime, the property could not be sold, transferred, or encumbered in any way without my direct, personal, and witnessed consent, with such witnesses explicitly not being lineal descendants or their spouses. Furthermore, it stipulated that any attempt to circumvent this clause, or to procure my consent under duress or without full, independent legal counsel provided to me at the expense of the estate, would render any purported sale or transfer null and void ab initio from the very beginning. And the kicker, the part that made tears spring to my eyes, was the final sentence. In the event of such a breach, all rights, title, and interest in the property shall immediately and irrevocably revert to the trusteeship of Arthur Miller, to be administered by my appointed executor, or his successor, for the sole and exclusive benefit, welfare, and lifetime residence of my beloved wife, Clara Ann Miller, Arthur. My wonderful, far-sighted Arthur. He had foreseen a possibility, however remote he must have thought it at the time, that I might one day need protecting, even from our own. The name of the appointed executor leaped out at me. Alastair Henderson, Sr., Mrs. Henderson's late husband. That meant the current executor, his successor, would be his son, Alastair Henderson, Jr., who had taken over his father's law practice. Mr. Henderson, not the real estate agent, but the son of Arthur's dearest friend, a respected lawyer in town. A wave of relief, so potent it left me weak, washed over me. I wasn't alone. Arthur had left me an ally, a weapon. For the first time in weeks, a spark of determination ignited within me. The despair didn't vanish, but it was now joined by a burgeoning sense of resolve. Michael and Janice had underestimated me. They had underestimated Arthur. They had assumed my grief, and age had rendered me docile and easily manipulated. They were about to find out how wrong they were. I carefully placed the documents back in the envelope, my hands no longer trembling but steady. The first thing I needed to do was call Mr. Henderson. Not the agent, but Alastair Henderson Jr., the lawyer. The true Mr. Henderson. My Mr. Henderson. The fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. And for the first time, I felt like I might actually have a chance to win, not just for myself, but for Arthur, for the sanctity of our home, and for the dignity they had tried to strip away from me. The house seemed to sigh around me, as if it, too, felt a glimmer of hope. Or perhaps it was just Arthur's spirit, whispering encouragement from the shadows. The next morning, I dressed with a care I hadn't felt in weeks. I chose my navy blue suit, the one I always wore for important occasions, and even put on a touch of lipstick. When I called Alastair Henderson's office, his secretary, a pleasant woman named Sarah, initially tried to schedule me for the following week. "I'm afraid Mr. Henderson is quite booked up," she explained apologetically. "Please," I said, my voice firm but polite, "tell him it's Clara Miller, Arthur Miller's widow. And it's regarding a protective covenant on my property." "It's urgent." There was a brief pause. Then Sarah said, "One moment, Mrs. Miller." A few minutes later, a warm, reassuring voice came on the line. "Mrs. Miller?" "Alastair Henderson. My father spoke of you and Arthur often, and with great affection. How can I help you?" Relief washed over me. I briefly explained the situation, the sale, the power of attorney, and the document Arthur had left. "Could you come in today, Mrs. Miller?" he asked immediately. "Say, around 2 o'clock? I'll clear my schedule." His understanding and immediate willingness to help were a balm to my bruised spirit. Walking into Alastair Henderson's office felt like stepping back in time, yet also into a brighter future. It was a traditional lawyer's office, lined with books, smelling faintly of old paper and polish, much like Arthur's study. Alastair himself was a man in his late 50s, with his father's kind eyes and a quiet air of competence. He listened patiently as I laid out the whole sorry tale, from Michael and Janice's initial suggestions to the appearance of the real estate agent and the devastating phone call with my son. I handed him the vellum envelope, my hand surprisingly steady. He read through the documents carefully, his expression growing more serious with each page. When he reached the protective covenant, he read it once, then twice, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Mrs. Miller," he said, looking up at me, his eyes twinkling, "Arthur was a remarkable man. This document is ironclad. Beautifully drafted, if I may say so. Your son, acting under that power of attorney, had absolutely no legal right to sell this property without adhering strictly to these conditions. And it seems quite clear he did not." He explained that the power of attorney, while valid for certain transactions, could not override a pre-existing, properly recorded covenant tied directly to the deed and the will of a co-owner, especially one designed for spousal protection. The clause about reversion to a trust administered by him, for my sole benefit, was the masterstroke. "Essentially, Mrs. Miller," Alastair continued, "as soon as Michael signed that sale agreement without your specific, witnessed consent as outlined here, and without involving my office as executor of your husband's trust conditions, he triggered the reversionary clause. The sale is not just voidable, it's likely void from the outset. The property, legally speaking, may have already reverted to the trust, of which I am the trustee, for your benefit." A tear traced its way down my cheek, but this time it was a tear of profound relief, of gratitude. "So, what happens now?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Now," Alastair said, his smile becoming a determined line, "we fight. But I dare say, Mrs. Miller, with this document, it will be a rather short fight. First, we'll send a cease and desist letter to your son, and to the purported buyers, and to the real estate agency involved, informing them of the invalidity of the sale due to the pre-existing covenant and the reversion of title. We will state unequivocally that you remain in your home, and any attempt to remove you will be met with the full force of the law." He paused, then added gently, "This will likely cause considerable distress to Michael and Janice, and certainly to the prospective buyers who may have made plans. There might be legal costs they incur, which will be their own responsibility given the circumstances." I felt a pang of something complex, not guilt, but a deep sadness for the brokenness of it all. Yet underneath that, the flame of resolve burned brighter. They had brought this upon themselves. "I understand," I said. "And I am ready," Alistair nodded. "Good. Arthur clearly intended for you to live out your days in that house, in peace and security. My father would have wanted me to see that through, and I am honored to do so." We spent another hour discussing strategy, the wording of the letters, and the potential reactions. Alistair was calm, methodical, and incredibly supportive. He treated me not as a frail old woman, but as a client, a partner in this fight. As I left his office, the weight on my shoulders felt significantly lighter. The path ahead wouldn't be easy emotionally, but for the first time, I felt empowered, armed not just with Arthur's foresight, but with the strength of the law and a capable ally by my side. The battle lines were drawn, and I was no longer a defenseless victim. I was Clara Miller, and I was taking back my home. The next few days were a period of tense anticipation. Alistair Henderson moved with swift efficiency. The letters were drafted, reviewed by me, and sent out by registered mail with return receipt requested. One to Michael and Janice, one to the Penningtons, the unfortunate would-be buyers, and one to the real estate agency that had facilitated the illicit sale. Each letter laid out, in no uncertain terms, the legal standing, the existence of Arthur's protective covenant, the conditions for sale that were blatantly ignored, the nullification of the transaction, and the immediate reversion of the property title to the Arthur Miller Trust for my sole benefit. It also included a stern warning against any attempts to harass me or forcibly remove me from my home. I waited, trying to maintain a semblance of normalcy. I watered my roses, baked an apple pie, Arthur's favorite recipe, and even managed to read a few chapters of a novel. But beneath the surface, my nerves hummed. I replayed conversations with Michael in my head, his dismissive tone, Janice's saccharine condescension. The hurt was still there, a dull ache, but it was now overlaid with a steely determination. They had chosen their path, a path of greed and disrespect. Now they would face the consequences of that choice, consequences Arthur had so carefully, so lovingly put in place decades ago. The first call came from Michael. His number flashed on my caller ID, and I let it ring 3 times before answering, taking a deep, steadying breath. "Mom." His voice was tight, strained, a stark contrast to the breezy confidence of our last conversation. "What is this letter from some lawyer, Henderson? What kind of nonsense is this?" The accusation in his tone was immediate. "It's not nonsense, Michael," I replied, my voice calm, much calmer than I felt. "It's Arthur's will, his foresight. It's the original deed to the house, the one you clearly never bothered to examine properly." There was a sputtering sound on the other end. But the power of attorney. I had the right. We had a buyer. They're threatening to sue us. I could hear Janice in the background, her voice shrill and panicked. "He's right, Clara. You can't do this. We'll be ruined." Ruined. The word hung in the air. They hadn't worried about ruining my life, my peace, my security. They had only worried about their own financial gain. "The power of attorney did not give you the right to override specific covenants attached to the deed, Michael," I stated, quoting Alistair almost verbatim. "Arthur made sure of that. The house was protected for me. You acted illegally, and I am simply asserting my rights Arthur ensured I would always have." "But Mom, the apartment, we've paid a deposit. We told everyone you were moving." Michael sounded desperate now, the bluster draining away to reveal a petulant child. "That was your decision, Michael, not mine. You made arrangements without my consent, based on a false premise. You'll have to undo them." The silence on the other end was thick with his frustration and dawning horror. Janice snatched the phone. "Clara, you are being incredibly selfish. After everything we've done for you." Her voice was laced with venom. "Done for me, Janice? I asked, my composure finally cracking just a little, a tremor of long-suppressed anger entering my voice. Or done to me. Did you think I wouldn't fight for my home, for the only place I have ever felt truly safe and happy? Did you think I was so old and useless that I would simply fade away quietly while you disposed of my life like it was last year's clutter? There was no coherent response, just indignant spluttering. You need to call off this lawyer, Clara. You need to sign whatever papers are necessary to make this right for us. The audacity was breathtaking. Even now, faced with their own wrongdoing, their primary concern was their own convenience, their own financial exposure. No, Janice, I said, my voice firm again. I will not. Mr. Henderson is acting on my instructions and on Arthur's. The sale is void. This house is mine, under the protection of the trust. That is final. I could hear Michael in the background, shouting something about lawyers and costs. You'll be hearing from our lawyer, Janice shrieked before abruptly hanging up. I slowly placed the receiver back in its cradle, my hand trembling slightly. The confrontation had been draining, but also strangely liberating. I had stood my ground. I had spoken my truth. And the power, for so long solely in their hands, was beginning to shift. Arthur's love, his foresight, was a shield around me. The days that followed were a flurry of legal communications, mostly between Alastair Henderson and the various parties Michael and Janice had embroiled in their scheme. The Penningtons, the prospective buyers, were understandably upset, and their lawyer made some initial noises about seeking damages for breach of contract. However, Alastair calmly pointed out that the contract was with Michael, who had misrepresented his authority to sell the property unencumbered. Any claim they had was against him, not against me or the trust. The real estate agency, smelling a potential lawsuit against them for failing to do due diligence on the title, quickly distanced themselves from Michael, issuing apologies and emphasizing their reliance on his assertions under the power of attorney. Michael and Janice, I heard through the grapevine of concerned and somewhat gleeful neighbors, were in a state of panic. They had apparently already spent a portion of the anticipated proceeds from the sale, a down payment on a new, larger SUV for Janice, a lavish vacation they'd booked. Now, not only was the sale off, but they were facing potential legal action from the Penningtons and the real estate agency looking to recoup its own costs. The situational irony was not lost on me. Their greed had led them directly into a financial quagmire of their own making. Alastair Henderson handled everything with impeccable professionalism and a quiet, reassuring strength. He kept me informed every step of the way, explaining the legal maneuvers in plain English, ensuring I understood and agreed with each action taken. There were a few more attempts from Michael to contact me, alternating between pleading and veiled threats, but I referred him directly to Alastair, refusing to be drawn into further emotional battles. I needed to conserve my strength, to focus on the restoration of my peace. One afternoon, about 2 weeks after the initial letters had gone out, Alastair called. Clara, he said, his voice warm. I have some good news. The Penningtons have formally withdrawn their claim against the property and are pursuing Michael for their losses. The real estate agency has also confirmed they consider the matter closed with regards to you and the house. And Michael's lawyer has finally, grudgingly, acknowledged the validity of the covenant and the reversion to the trust. It seems they've realized they have no legal leg to stand on. A wave of profound relief washed over me, so strong I had to sit down. So, it's over? I asked, hardly daring to believe it. Essentially, yes, Alastair confirmed. The attempts to sell your home out from under you have been nullified. The title is secure within the Arthur Miller Trust, with you as the sole beneficiary for your lifetime. You are safe in your home, Clara. No one can force you out. Tears welled in my eyes, tears of gratitude, of exhaustion, of a hard-won victory. Thank you, Alastair, I whispered. Thank you for everything. And thank Arthur for me. Wherever he is, he knows, Clara, Alastair said gently. He certainly knew what he was doing when he drafted that covenant. He loved you very much. The legal battle was won. The house was safe. My home, my sanctuary, was mine again, unequivocally. The shock and anger from Michael and Janice were palpable, even from a distance. They had tried to take everything to reduce my life to a balance sheet, and they had failed. Their underestimation of me, and more importantly, of Arthur's enduring love and foresight, had been their undoing. The Penningtons, I heard later, did indeed sue Michael for their expenses and emotional distress, and the settlement cost him dearly, forcing him to sell some investments he'd been counting on for his own future. Janice had to cancel her vacation and return the SUV. Their carefully constructed facade of affluence and control had crumbled, all because they couldn't see past their own entitlement. The quiet satisfaction I felt wasn't about their suffering, not truly. It was about the reaffirmation of justice, the restoration of what was rightfully mine, and the profound sense that Arthur's love had reached across the years to protect me one last time. The true climax wasn't a shouting match or a dramatic courtroom scene. It was the quiet, legal confirmation that my home was secure, a victory achieved through meticulous planning and unwavering resolve, just as Arthur would have wanted. The immediate aftermath was surprisingly quiet. The storm of legal letters and angry phone calls subsided, leaving behind an almost unnerving calm. Michael and Janice retreated into a wounded silence. There were no more calls, no more attempts to persuade or bully me. I imagine their conversations were now dominated by lawyers, bank statements, and the bitter taste of their own miscalculations. The Penningtons, the would-be buyers, sent a short, rather formal note through their solicitor, expressing their regret for any distress caused to me and confirming they held Michael entirely responsible. I felt a measure of sympathy for them. They were innocent pawns in Michael and Janice's greedy game. But my primary emotion was one of profound, bone-deep relief. The threat had passed. I could walk through my home, tend my roses, sit in Arthur's chair, without the shadow of impending loss hanging over me. It was as if the house itself breathed a sigh of relief, settling back into its foundations, secure and peaceful once more. Mrs. Henderson from next door brought over a freshly baked coffee cake, her eyes shining with triumph. "I knew you had it in you, Clara," she declared. And Arthur, bless his heart, he always was 10 steps ahead of everyone. Her validation, the support of my true friends, meant the world to me. It was a reminder that while one part of my family had failed me so spectacularly, another, chosen family, stood by me. Alastair Henderson handled the final legalities of affirming the trust's hold on the property, ensuring every I was dotted and T crossed. He visited me a few times, not just as my lawyer, but as a friend, sharing stories of his father and Arthur, their fishing trips, their endless debates about politics and baseball. These conversations were a comfort, bridging the past with the present, reinforcing the legacy of integrity and friendship that had ultimately saved my home. He also helped me review my own will and set up new powers of attorney, this time appointing him and another trusted friend, ensuring that no one could ever again try to manipulate my affairs for their own benefit. It was a sobering process, but necessary. I was reclaiming not just my home, but my autonomy, my right to decide my own future. There was a melancholy that settled in, too, a quiet sadness for the relationship with Michael that was now irrevocably broken. He was my son, the baby I had rocked in my arms in this very house. How had we come to this? Greed, I supposed, was a powerful corrosive. And perhaps a lifetime of me sacrificing, of putting his needs first, had inadvertently taught him that my resources, my very life, were his to command. It was a hard lesson to learn so late in life, but one I would not forget. The peace I felt was tinged with this sorrow, but it was a genuine peace nonetheless. The peace of a battle hard fought and justly won. The peace of knowing I was safe, and that Arthur's love had been, and continued to be, my strongest shield. In the weeks and months that followed, I found a new rhythm. The house, once a source of anxiety and impending loss, became my sanctuary again, but in a deeper, more conscious way. I had fought for it, and in doing so, I had fought for myself. Every morning, I would walk through the garden, Arthur's roses blooming more vibrantly than ever, it seemed. I took pleasure in the simple routines, brewing my tea, reading the newspaper in the sunlit breakfast nook, listening to the birdsong. I reconnected with old friends, joined a book club at the local library, even started volunteering at the community thrift store twice a week. Life opened up in ways I hadn't expected. The ordeal had stripped away illusions, but it had also revealed a strength within me I hadn't fully appreciated. I was not the frail, forgetful old woman Michael and Janice had tried to paint me as. I was Clara Miller, a woman of resilience, with a home she loved and a life she was determined to live on her own terms. As for Michael and Janice, I heard sporadic updates. They were struggling financially, their social standing in their own community somewhat tarnished by the whispers of what they'd tried to do to poor old Clara. There were no apologies, no attempts at reconciliation. And in truth, I expected none. The chasm between us was too deep, the betrayal too profound. I mourned the son I thought I had, the family I believed we were, but I did not mourn the loss of their presence in my current life. My peace was too precious. Sometimes, I would take out the old vellum envelope, rereading Arthur's declaration of marital homestead and protective covenant. Each word was a testament to his love, his wisdom, his fierce desire to protect me. It was more than just a legal document. It was a love letter, a promise kept across the veil of time. Mr. Henderson, Alastair, continued to be a steadfast presence, managing the trust with quiet confidence and offering friendship that filled a part of the void Arthur had left. He encouraged me to think about the future of the house, long-term. "It's yours for your lifetime, Clara, to do with as you wish within that," he'd said. "But Arthur also wanted you to have peace of mind about its ultimate disposition." After much reflection, I made my decision. I wouldn't leave it to Michael. That bridge was well and truly burned. Instead, I amended my will. Upon my passing, the house on Elm Street, my beloved home, would be gifted to a local historical society, with the stipulation that it be preserved and perhaps used as a small community museum or a residence for a visiting artist, a place that would continue to nurture life and creativity, a legacy of warmth and resilience, not of greed and discord. This decision brought me a profound sense of closure. My home would outlive me, its memories cherished, its structure protected, a quiet monument to a life well-lived and a love that endured. I had faced the ultimate betrayal and emerged not unscathed, but stronger, wiser, and profoundly at peace, surrounded by the quiet dignity of Arthur's roses and the enduring spirit of the home we had built together. And as I sit here now, sharing this with you, I know that my story is one of vindication, yes, but more importantly, it's a story of enduring love and the quiet power of knowing your own worth.